Hello and welcome to today's WorkSafe Month Seniors Week webinar, Balancing Act Employers and Employees Talking About the Next Life Stage. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania and I will be your moderator. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I'll now explain how you can participate in today's webinar. Here is a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this in the upper right corner on your computer. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would, however, prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Questions will be taken at the end of today's presentation. Please use your questions pane on the control panel to type and submit questions at the time. Today's webinar is also being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenters, Lynn McGaurr and Rosalind Herbert from Council on the Ageing, or COTA, COTA. Your first presenter, Rosalind, is COTA Tasmania's Active Ageing Project Officer. Rosalind's presentation today will be delivered via video recording. Before we do play that recording, Lynn would like to say a few words.
Hi, thank you. Hello from Lynn from COTA on the Council on the Ageing. I just wanted to mention that the research that Ros has based her talk on was done before COVID-19. So we completely understand that the landscape has changed somewhat. The employment landscape has changed somewhat or considerably due to COVID-19. And I hope you'll take that into account when you listen to what she has to say. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Ros. I'm the Active Ageing Project Officer at COTA Tasmania, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in person today, but it's fantastic that with modern technology I can still be part of the webinar today. So I'll be going through a fairly brief overview of Tasmania's workforce. As most of you will probably be aware, Tasmania's population is ageing. We have the oldest population in Australia and the fastest ageing population of any state and territory. So in 2016, almost 20% of the population were aged over 65, and this is expected to increase to about 25% by 2030 and over 30% by 2060. Comes as no surprise that with an ageing population we also see an ageing workforce. So in 2016, over 45% of Tasmania's workforce were aged over 45 years, which is the age that we define an older worker. And this is because we've heard from Tasmanians who feel that they have been discriminated against based on their age in their workplace, and those people have been in their 40s. There are also other organisations and research groups who use the 45-year definition. It comes as no surprise as well that as we see a high proportion of older workers in the workforce, we are seeing a decline in the proportion of younger workers. And this ageing is occurring all across Tasmania, particularly in the southeast. Over 50% of the workforce in the southeast region of Tasmania were aged over 45 years, but as you can see from this graph, the workforces are ageing in every area of Tasmania. We also see ageing workforce in every industry in Tassie, and I just want to point out particularly some of our key industries that have some of the highest proportion, the orange bars, and also highest numbers of older workers. So in health, education and administration, we see particularly high proportions and numbers of workers, which is something to consider moving forward. There are also more people working beyond the traditional retirement age of 65 years. So from 2006 to 2016, the proportion and number of Tasmanians in the workforce who are aged over 65 actually doubled, as you can see here. And again, we see that increase across all industries. So some of the key industries here as well, we see particularly high proportions and numbers of older workers. So there are a lot of benefits that come from an ageing workforce. We've got a lot of people in the workforce who have a lot of workforce knowledge, but also a whole bunch of life experiences that actually make them more productive and mean that they've got a lot of skills that they've been able to develop over their life. Research suggests that older workers also tend to be a little bit more dedicated, and with all their life experience and experience in the workforce, a lot of older workers also tend to be more efficient because they're aware of practices that make them more efficient, and they're also aware of how they work themselves. They've had time to actually develop those skills. But there are a lot of challenges as well that come with an ageing workforce. There is the changing physical and cognitive capacities that tend to be highlighted a lot, but really the biggest challenges that COTA Tasmania have seen have actually been in changing lifestyles of older workers. So as people get older, they do tend to want to change their lifestyle. So maybe reduce their responsibilities, have a bit more flexibility in how they work so that they can spend more time with family and friends, maybe do some more travelling and those sorts of things. But also sometimes it's a little bit forced on people that they need to change their lifestyle, particularly if they have caring responsibilities. So that may be caring for a parent, for a partner, for children as well, and informal caring roles. So, and also grandchildren. People can often have requirements to support grandkids so that their children can continue to work. So another challenge, of course, is that as we have more older workers, we're having more people leave the workforce. And with less people coming through behind, that means that there's going to be a reduction in knowledge and skills, and also numbers of people that we need to fill our workforce. So one of the big things that we really need to be doing in Tasmania with an ageing workforce is actually encouraging people to stay at work for longer. But there are serious barriers to this, particularly ageism, and I'll talk about the definition of ageism in a second. But this is the biggest barrier. Even though we need to keep people employed, older workers feel that they're being forced out of the workplace through ageism. A lot of businesses and organisations also may have policies in place that may actually unconsciously discriminate against people based on their age, and also in legislation. But a lot of businesses are unaware or don't know quite how to actually implement supportive workplaces that enable people to have flexible working arrangements so that they can continue to work but also have those other responsibilities that they've got outside their working life. And this can include the implementation of health and wellbeing programs that really support people to stay engaged, to stay healthy, and to stay physically and mentally well. So mature workers, they want to keep working a lot of the time. A lot of older Tasmanians, but also older people across the world, feel that they have the skills to continue to work and that they are effective at what they do, and they are able to adapt to a changing working environment. It's one of the biggest stereotypes you might hear about older workers is that they are set in their ways and they're not open at all to change. This tends to be more of a personality trait rather than an age-related thing. But people don't enjoy working when they're older because they do feel that they are being discriminated against based on their age, that they are no longer included, they no longer fit in their workplace, that they're being disrespected or devalued, and that their needs aren't being considered. So ageism is when a person is treated less favourably than someone in a similar position purely based on their age. And we know that ageism can affect younger and older people, but it tends to be much more common and much more damaging when aimed towards older people. This is because in Australia we tend to have an ageist society that values youth. You don't have to look very far to see fairly negative messaging and imagery about becoming older, and even in the language we use ourselves. And of course this does filter into the workplace. So people do feel as they get older that they are treated differently, that They have different expectations placed upon them, not based on what they're doing, but simply because of their birthday. And some people feel that they're actually pushed out of the workforce, that they are treated so disrespectfully and devalued so much that they feel that they cannot work anymore under these particular conditions. And it is a really vicious cycle. So what can happen is stereotype threat, which is when not only do colleagues and managers and people you work with actually start taking on the stereotypes of older worker, but also the person themselves begins to internalise what they expect of an older worker. And this can mean that the person may feel more stressed. They might feel that they have to work harder to have the same level of productivity as younger workers, that they need to prove themselves much, much more than they used to have to. Unsurprisingly, this can lead to disengagement, fatigue, and decreased job satisfaction, that nothing they do will ever be enough. And that leads to decreased productivity and people leaving the workforce prematurely. So this decreased productivity that is often associated with older workers is much more commonly, much more likely to happen, much more likely to be caused by ageism rather than age itself. So, and then when a person has left the workplace, it is really hard for them to get back into the workforce. So even though less older people tend to be unemployed than younger people, the period of time that they are unemployed and looking for work tends to be much, much longer for older people than younger people. So it can be up to 2 or 3 years that someone is looking for work. And this comment on the right-hand side was actually in response to a report from a couple of years ago that found that 1 in 3 businesses surveyed wouldn't even consider the resume from someone aged over 50 years, which is illegal. And the fact that businesses were even, this is 1 in 3 businesses were actually willing to admit to that, it's probably the case that that proportion is actually much higher, which is quite concerning. It shows that ageism really is alive and well in workplaces. So the impact of ageism in the workforce is significant on someone's health. Employment brings us all, well, most of us anyway, a real sense of pride, purpose and identity. It's something that we tend to enjoy, we find satisfaction out of, and it keeps us mentally, physically and socially engaged. So we see people every day when we are working a lot of the time. Not so much during COVID, I suppose, if you're working from home. But there's also the financial aspect, that you are more financially stable when you have a job. When people are unemployed, whether voluntary or involuntary, there tends to be a reduced sense of identity. People start to wonder who they are without their career, without that role. And boredom and uncertainty about the future can also creep in. And those loss of social networks, those people that you used to see every day, you don't see at all anymore. And of course, there's that sense of financial instability, which is particularly a problem for older women. So a lot of older women have quite low superannuation, and this may be because they've been in and out of the workforce over their life with caring responsibilities for children and parents and different things, but also maybe more part-time work as well and lower paid work. So all of that together can of course lead to quite significant mental illness, unsurprisingly. So it's important that businesses are supporting older workers, not just for the older workers' sake, but also for the business sake, to keep productivity high and to keep the knowledge and skills that people bring to their workplace. Now, there are the traditional high performance practices that are often used that cater to people of all ages, but research shows that to engage older workers and to keep them in valued and feeling positive about their working environment, you do need mature age specific practices that cater to those specific changes in the lifestyle and capacities of older workers. So this may be those health and wellbeing programs, it may be having really frank discussions about where a person is at and where they may want to go, having reduced responsibilities or reduced hours, and the things that are happening outside their lives. And so it's a much more interactive, collaborative approach to actually discussing where a worker is at, their specific needs, and catering to that. And that maximises productivity of both the business and the individual, which shouldn't come as any surprise. If you have happy workers, then you have a happy business. So just to finish up, this is a quote from a participant in some research that COTA did a few years ago. It just ties things up really nicely, I think. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the next talk from Lynn, who will discuss some of those practices and how exactly to support older workers moving forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So we now welcome COTA's Getting to Work Project Officer, Lynn McGaurr.
Thanks, Stephanie. So hi everyone, I'm Lynn and I'm here as someone who's looked for COTA at barriers to mature age work and as a representative of COTA Tasmania, which is an organisation that advocates for older workers. So I'm not an HR expert myself and my talk will of course promote the interests of mature age workers. However, my presentation draws on academic research and the experiences of people that Ros and I interviewed for the website Work45+, which I'll talk about later. So researchers found many benefits to businesses from fostering age-diverse workplaces, but the main reason I'm speaking today is because the theme of WorkSafe Month is Safe Bodies, Safe Minds. As Ros's talk explained, ageism in the workplace can cause serious mental health problems for older workers. So if we want workplaces that are safe for everyone, it's vital to take action to ensure mature workers don't fall victim to that stereotype threat that Ros talked about, which can lead to workplace stress, disengagement and mental ill health, or the problems that can occur when a worker retires or resigns before they're financially secure or emotionally ready. So I'll start by looking again at the recent report by the Centre for Excellence in Population Ageing Research. According to CPAR, it's possible to increase the life satisfaction of mature workers by making sure they're included and treated fairly, catering for their changing needs, and encouraging mentoring or knowledge sharing across age groups. In fact, older workers report that mentoring and knowledge sharing are extremely important in making them feel more satisfied. CPAR also talks about the psychological benefits of relational work design characteristics such as social support and a sense of meaning at work that make it possible for employees to see the impact of their efforts on others. CPAR also found that many older workers really like employers to be clear about roles and give good feedback. Importantly, CPAR found older workers are just like everyone else when it comes to burnout. They're less likely to take stress leave or resign if they're treated fairly, are not overworked, and can balance work with their caring responsibilities. Now, I just want to go back a minute to something Ros said in her presentation that you might have found surprising. She noted that CPAR found women who worked after 65 were likely to be positive about their work, unlike so many of the other mature workers CPAR heard from. There's probably good reason for this. There are very few women, or relatively few women, still working after 65. So this suggests that the others have either been pushed out against their will by subtle or overt age discrimination, haven't been able to get work in the first place, or have retired or resigned because they don't find work satisfying enough to stay. If this is right, it means those women over 65 who are still employed are likely to be in workplaces that support them. So CPAR says that the fact that women workers over 65 tend to be positive shows it is possible to create workplaces that support mature workers. Research shows that there are ways to avoid stereotype threat and increase engagement, but to do this effectively, you have to combine both high performance practices and practices directed specifically at older workers. But even before that, you need to combat ageism. And this is, of course, a bit of a theme of our presentation today, but it's really important. So combating ageism is one of the best ways to improve the psychological and emotional health of mature workers, and indeed all workers. This slide outlines many ways you can do this, and you can learn more about how to combat ageism on the websites Work45+ and another one called Every Age Counts. So if you just Google those, you'll come up with the URLs. For my part, sorry, I went too fast there. For my part, I think the most important thing is to lead from the top. Age equality needs to be the norm, not the exception. It needs to be such a central part of workplace culture that any examples of ageism would immediately be noticed and called out. I can't stress enough that this can only happen fully if people at the top never behave in an ageist way. And for me, this includes avoiding jokes about age, or even their own age if they're older themselves. So I'll now get back to those high performance and individualised practices Ros mentioned earlier. So CPAR found the best way to combine these is to include, individualise and integrate. So that's an easy sort of phrase to remember. So include means making sure age is never a barrier to those high performance practices, such as rewards for achievement, access to training, and the ability to contribute to organisational decisions. So here we see these high performance work practices are those work practices that apply or should apply to everybody in the workplace, but sometimes older workers feel like they're shut out from those. Individualise means taking a life course approach. You probably do this already for younger workers, so you know how to make it happen. Provide older workers with work flexibility, job role modification if necessary, health and safety support, and for those who want it, sensitive retirement or career transition support. To integrate, make sure there's really strong and positive knowledge transfer between generations. As I said before, older workers really value this. They want to pass on relevant knowledge they've built up over their careers, but they really do also want to learn from younger staff. And just to show that making workplaces age diverse is seen as beneficial to industry as well as workers, on the Work45+ website, we've included this checklist adapted from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I haven't got time to go through it here today, but you can find it on the Work45+ website and read it through there and perhaps adapt it for your own purposes if it seems appropriate. In the next part of my presentation, I want to hone in on one important aspect of individualising for older workers. As workers approach the age when they can get a pension, which is now 67, they might start thinking about making changes to their working arrangements. But research and experience show they may not actually talk about this with their manager because they're so concerned that they'll be targeted for retrenchment as a result. They're concerned that the moment they mention anything to do with wanting to make changes because they're getting older, that their employers will think that they're ripe for retirement. So when we say it's good for older workers to be able to talk to managers about the next life stage, we're not suggesting that most of those conversations will be about retirement. In fact, CPAR found that only 39% of people aged 55 to 64 have actually started planning for retirement. That doesn't mean we don't need to have conversations about what people want in their workplace and their work as they age. To help COTA Tasmania better understand how to make it easier for older workers to talk about what they want from their job as they age, we interviewed two people who have thought about this a lot. Anne Kirby-Fay from Career Options Tasmania and HR expert Diane Underwood, who has since joined RACT as its Chief People Officer. So the following tips are a combination of insights from Anne and Diane and suggestions from other sources that we've consulted. So first of all, you might consider getting someone from outside your organisation to start the ball rolling, just to make sure your older workers don't think you have a hidden agenda. Sometimes it's just easier for older workers to talk about some of the things that matter to them with somebody that they feel is really completely independent. Whether you use consultants or not, make sure you give your managers training in how to have these conversations, because they don't always come naturally. Not only that, but some older workers have said they feel that younger managers are dismissive or lack understanding or empathy for mature workers. Another way to get these conversations started might be to invite outside experts to come along and give information that older workers can really use. Information about flexible employment options, superannuation, financial services, or how long service leave provisions work. These talks from outside experts can be really great conversation starters for older staff and their managers. They just help get the ball rolling. It's also important to create a safe space for older workers to talk. And remember that every older worker is different. That's really, really important. You can't have just a blanket approach to older workers, because like younger workers and middle-aged workers, older workers are all individuals. So make sure older workers know that talks about the next stage are entirely voluntary, and don't mention retirement unless the older worker raises it. Be sure they know that the work they do will continue to be valuable and valued even if they change their work arrangements. If older workers do decide to talk to you, let them lead the conversation, but also be prepared to have that conversation and be genuine about what you can and can't offer. At the same time, it's important to recognise that flexible work arrangements can have benefits for everyone. For example, if an older worker wants to go part-time in a job that's always been full-time, it might create a really good opportunity for knowledge transfer with a younger worker through job sharing. So this comment from Diane makes her case for having these conversations with older workers. So I'll read it out here, even though it's up there on the screen. Diane says, I see it often with young kids entering the workforce with no skills, and employers don't want to take a chance on them. Similarly, if older people want to move part-time, some employers think it's too hard because it's not the norm. But every day we go to work and deal with team members who have individual needs, and you have to do it anyway. So let's be open and transparent about it and have a forum about how you can provide these opportunities. So in keeping with the theme of WorkSafe Month this year, it's important to think about the benefits for staff, and I've summarised some of those here. Staff will be more informed and more confident to have a conversation about what they need and prefer. They may choose to be more involved in planning their next stage rather than just letting it happen. They may choose to start taking some actions themselves, recognising that there are some things employers can't fix. But importantly, the health, wellbeing, interactions, confidence and satisfaction of older staff are likely to improve, and they may stay in the workforce longer than they might otherwise have done. So COTA Tasmania has created a website that has a lot of this information on it. And so I'd like to put in a plug for the website by playing you a video extract from the interviews that we did with Anne and Diane, just so you can get a sense of what sort of information is available there and the approach that's taken. It goes for about 4.5 minutes. So when that's done, I'll come back with to be part of the question and answer session.
Anne and I spoke recently about induction processes generally, and that in inducting people, it's one of the most important things you can do in a company. You're inducting them into the reason for your existence, and you want your workers believing in your purpose in the organisation, and that's the importance of an induction. And from my perspective, an induction starts from the moment you send that job ad out. So you're engaging the community in what you're there to do. And therefore, you know, there are parts of the induction that need to be consistent for every single employee. But what this question really goes to the heart of is when you're inducting workers, not only older workers, it's about the manager that's working with them, finding individually about what makes them tick. How am I going to motivate you? How am I going to get the best out of you? What are your strengths, weaknesses, barriers to performing well? How can I be a better manager or leader for this person? So an induction, I wouldn't say you treat older workers any differently from anyone else, but the important thing to note is that induction is only successful if you're getting to the heart of what makes that individual tick. So every induction has to be individualised in that respect. So therefore, from an older worker's perspective, they're going to be wanting different things naturally than someone who's just entering the workforce for the first time. It may not necessarily be, it may not be career progression, or, you know, I'm generalising there, but as a result, what do you want out of your work life? And how can I ensure when you come into work for me every day that, you know, it's a great experience for you, therefore it's going to be a great experience for me as well.
I might just follow up on that, because there's the induction, and then so much of what you're talking about now is also what we say to people: you've got to manage your own first 3 months. Yeah. It's not up to your, well, it is up to your manager to also be touching base and having really good conversations like that. Yeah. But don't assume it's going to happen, because so often, oh, thank goodness we've got the warm body, get on with the work, and so many people say, well, I passed my probation time, but nobody said anything. So we say to people, you know, here's about your first 90 days. This is what's important. Let's have a checklist. You've got to do this, do that. You've got to make sure that all of those good conversations happen. Without being pushy, but put it in the diary, ask for them, yeah, and get to know your boss just as much as he needs to get to know you, he or she, because they are the ones that make the biggest difference to a worker's working life.
Absolutely. So employers can create a workplace environment where all workers are respected and respect each other, but it's not easy, is it? You're speaking to the heart of what all workplaces strive for, and it's a great culture. But there's not one thing that describes a culture. It's all about the behaviours and the way people go about their business. Often people put, you know, your purpose, your vision, your mission up on the wall and expect that that's it, and then you see other behaviours going on. It's about opting in and out of cultures that you like or you don't in workplaces. And so often I see people, and Annie, you would see this all the time, where in one workplace a person just does not fit in, and it's a bit of a train wreck of an experience, and then they move to their next job and they thrive, and you can see it in every part of their being. And that's about people engaging or not with the culture of the workplace. It's one of the hardest things employers can do, and frankly why I've been employed so, you know, for the last 30 years has been all about the fact that it's, change management and cultural change. What's the gap between the culture we want and the culture we've got, and how do we bridge that gap? The one thing the tone set from the top
Yes.
when setting the culture. So the board and the CEO and the senior executive need to walk the walk. And the way you set the tone is not to assume that everyone is the same. We're all individuals, we all come with our own good stuff and bad baggage and the like, and it's actually about being open enough to accept people for their those individual traits that they bring to the workplace, but acknowledge that as a positive thing. I'm pretty much a glass half full person. I think you can turn any poor behaviour in the workplace around, but that requires a lot of time and energy from people at the top to do things differently. And I think the message is, I truly believe the one thing is getting those people at the top of any ladder in any organisation to set the tone around the culture and the respect for one another, and everyone else will follow suit. And my experience with Colony 47 has been amazing. The CEO, Danny Sutton, actually came along and started a values-based approach with his cultural change piece at Colony 47 around what are the values that I'm seeing, what do our people want, and it's one of those organisations you walk in and you see the values, and they're unusual ones. They're not usual, trust and respect and passion or whatever the usual ones are. They're unique to the organisation, and people pick each other up on those values as well. It's an amazing thing to see when someone gets it right, but it usually takes the drive from the senior levels of the organisation for that to occur.
Okay, so that was just a little taste of one of the videos from the Work45 Plus website. Got plenty of resources here. I think one of the interesting things is just how much information there is out there about creating an age diverse workplace and working with older people as part of that age diverse workplace. So I urge you to, if you're interested, to go and have a look at some of the documents that I've listed here. And now I'll hand over to Steph.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lynn. So Lynn and Rosalind, who is also online now, will take any questions that that the audience have. So please type your questions into your questions pane. One question that has come through from an audience member in Victoria: do you know if the aged care workforce is similar there?
I'm not sure, Ros, do you know the aged care workforce or the ageing workforce?
Well, I don't know. I know that I don't know the specifics. I can't tell you those specifics. I could get that information. But ageing populations are all over Australia. Victoria and New South Wales, I think, are some of the slowest ageing populations, but they are still ageing, and that would reflect in the workforce. Unfortunately, I can't really give you much more specific information than that, but yeah, they're not ageing as quickly as, I wouldn't expect the ageing workforce to be ageing as quickly as no state or territory is ageing as fast as Tasmania, but it's likely to be an issue. I'm just not sure how much of one, sorry.
But COTA Victoria could talk to you about that if you wanted to contact them.
Yeah, and and it's not too hard for us. We've got the data here we've just got our data from the ABS, the census data from 2016, and I can easily dredge that up and quickly bump out some numbers if someone is interested in that. But yeah, COTA Victoria should be all over it as well.
Thank you, Lynn and Rosalind. Another question, how old do you consider is too old to still be working?
Well, there's no age limit to workforce participation. So as long as a person has the physical and cognitive capacity to continue and wishes to continue, then they can continue. I don't have a number in my own head, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think a lot of workers agree with that as well. As I know that there's some research done out of New Zealand that shows that they worked with a 75-year-old who is super motivated, traveling all over the world, doing the best work he's ever done, and then another 55-year-old who really just didn't want to work anymore. So it is a lot about your mindset and what you want to be doing, I suppose.
All right, thank you, Lynn and Rosalind. There's still time to submit questions via the questions pane for our presenters today, Lynn McGaurr and Rosalind Herbert from COTA Tasmania. And just a reminder, everyone, that this presentation is a joint WorkSafe Month Seniors Week presentation as well. Just a comment that has come through, Lynn and Rosalind, you may wish to comment on it. The problem is that you can have somebody working with you that is really past working, and it is really hard to deal with that.
Yes, well, that's a workplace issue that could apply to someone of any age. And I think that, HR people are trained to work with challenges like that. As someone who's not an HR person, I'm probably not the best person to comment on that, but I just make the point that people who might not be performing in a position as well as an employer would hope can be people of any age. Ros, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I guess one thing is as well is that making sure that there's nothing, I mean, we talk about people with caring responsibilities and we have actually talked to Tasmanians who haven't been supported in their workplace to be more flexible. And so that creates this added stress, and it does affect their productivity. So not having those supportive mechanisms in place can contribute. But yeah, actually, if someone isn't performing well, that's the age-old question about how do you approach that issue. And as Lynn says, I totally agree that, part of it, well, it can be people of any age, depending on where they are at, and any 30-year-old can need to move on from a position that they've been in for too long and aren't finding satisfaction in anymore.
All right, thanks, Lynn and Rosalind. Another question. Would you agree that injuries are more likely to occur with older workers?
Not necessarily. It might be important to take into account certain changes in people's physical abilities as they get older, but at the same time, older workers can be have been shown to be very aware of workplace safety and very careful. So there's one of the documents that are listed in the resources is a book called Safe and Healthy, A Guide to Managing an Ageing Workforce. And if you're interested in, a PDF of that is available on the Work45 Plus website, and if you're interested in that subject, I'd urge you to have a look at that. It's very comprehensive. And although it might be necessary to make some changes for some older people in the workplace, as I say, there is research to show that older people are actually more conscious of work health and safety matters than people who are younger than them.
Thanks, Lynn. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Rosalind?
No, I totally agree with that. I think, you know, if we think about even driving, and you think about older drivers with all that experience behind them, they know how to drive a bit more safely and to their skill level, whereas, you know, younger drivers can sometimes need to develop those skills. So I guess it's the same kind of thing around being aware of safety and risk management. Yeah, there will be things that will have to change, but for some people, but yeah, totally agree with everything that Lynn said.
Thanks,
I mean,
Rosalind.
it might be necessary to, you know, there might be some things that an older person might not be able to do as well as they used to, such as if it involves, you know, physical demands, such as lifting heavy weights and things like that. But these things need to be discussed between the person's employer and the person themselves.
So a question has come in, Lynn and Rosalind. Is it true that older employees are less efficient as compared to younger employees when it comes to use of technology and the latest softwares?
Ros, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, look, people who haven't grown up with digital technology are obviously going to have to develop new skills, and it is a bit of a barrier, particularly older workers around the 55 plus mark. But there are so many people who are still really tech savvy, who are older, and I guess it is more of an issue that there are more older workers who aren't tech savvy than younger workers, because younger workers have grown up in that environment. But in some cases, we've done a little bit around digital inclusion broadly in Tasmania, and what we actually see is that younger people, even though they have grown up with technology and know how to use social media and apps and those sorts of things, they don't actually have the skills to use the internet to find for information purposes and to use it efficiently in those sorts of ways. So there is, there are these issues around digital use. I think younger people can pick up the new skills a little bit faster because they have grown up with that technology, but older people are not, people can continue to learn these new things, and there can sometimes be a bit of fear around picking up a new device and learning how to use a digital technology, because there is a lot of different language and skills needed to use those devices. But confidence is probably the biggest barrier that we find older people have in using digital technology. So there's a bit of a fear of looking like an idiot or breaking something. And once you move past that barrier, people can pick things up really quickly. It's just that you've got to allow them to do that. And yeah, it is an issue, the digital thing, but this stereotype that older people are adverse to learning new skills is completely, well, for the vast majority of people, it's completely wrong. And there are plenty of people who've really engaged with technology, who are older and have really wonderful skills as well. So yeah, I guess, Lynn, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that the fear of failure and the fear of making a mess of things, or a sense that the person teaching them is impatient with them, can be a real barrier for some older people who might be very eager to pick up new IT skills. It's also, so that's something for people who are training older people to be aware of, you know, that they are they may be very sensitive to any implication that that the person training them is losing patience with them while they're becoming more, you know, taking the time to become more confident. But they certainly do, on the whole, appreciate the value of information technology, and do often really want to have those skills. It's another important thing for older people is to understand why something is valuable in the workplace. So those explanations can be really useful too. Taking the time to explain to an older person, or anybody really, what it is about this new technology that's going to make their work easier, or make them more productive, or bring greater value to their workplace. You know, that kind of thing is really important and helps set the scene for that transfer of knowledge that older people really, really appreciate. As I said in my talk, you know, it seems to come as a surprise to some people that older people actually do value knowledge transfer from younger to older people, and, you know, welcome that. And that goes for IT as well.
Thanks, Rosalind and Lynn. So just a comment that's come through again, you may like to respond to it. Unlike their younger and sometimes fickle counterparts, older employees are known for their strong work ethic and loyalty.
Yes, that certainly comes through in the research that we've looked at, and also that they don't take more sick days. That's part of that loyalty and strong work ethic. They don't take more sick days on the whole than younger people, and they are very reliable, and they value their jobs highly in most cases. So I agree with that comment very much, but I'm not quite sure that I want this to sound like we're promoting intergenerational conflict. So, you know, I don't want to stereotype younger workers any more than I would like to stereotype older workers.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that we really like to highlight is that it's not necessarily about just hiring older workers. Like, hiring older workers alone will actually create other issues within your workplace, because the issue is diversity. And you need an age diverse workforce, the same way you need a culturally and gender diverse workforce, because that's how you get new ideas and you get new perspectives and sharing of new ideas and skills, and that's what really makes a workforce really productive. And so, yeah, keeping those older workers on, we know that there are issues around, as we've talked about today, you know, forcing older workers out. But yeah, that doesn't mean that you only hire young, older workers, or begin stereotyping against people of other ages or genders or cultures or anything like that. So yeah.
It's also good to have an age diverse workforce if your customers are from many age groups as well. You know, if it's good for your workforce to reflect your customers often. So that's another thing to think about.
Okay, thanks, Rosalind and Lynn. No further questions have come through, so I'll begin to wrap up this afternoon's webinar. So thank you, Lynn McGaurr and Rosalind Herbert from COTA Tasmania, and thank you everyone for attending today's joint WorkSafe Month Seniors Week webinar, Balancing Act, Employers and Employees talking about the next life stage. At the close of this webinar, you will receive a survey to complete. We do appreciate you providing us with your feedback. And today's webinar has also been recorded and will be made available at the end of WorkSafe Month on our YouTube page and also on the WorkSafe Tasmania website. On behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and the WorkCover Tasmania Board, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Rosalind, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.